The war is over. Jesus is your healer, your financier, and your righteousness. Just believe you receive it and you got it. Yay! Praise the Lord. I'm James, and welcome to Just James. I don't think I ever said that before, but we're continuing talking about proper sex. Respect sex, proper sex. This time we're talking about after marriage. Simple guidelines, and the main key point is only when appropriate. Now, there are two simple guidelines. Is one, only if they're in eternity, and two, only after you're married again. And I guess there's a third one I didn't put down. I better write it down. 3, only if it's been after you're married. But really, the third one is it's heaven only acknowledges a new marriage if the previous one was stopped because of adultery, not because you just ran out of money, or you just got tired of each other, or the kids are arguing or stuff like that. It doesn't really work that way. Heaven doesn't really acknowledge that, because you can read through the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, even Jesus himself, you're not supposed to be, adultery is really the only reason why you can separate a marriage. So the third guideline, I guess I'll write that down, would be only if the previous marriage ended in adultery, because if it didn't have adultery in it, Jesus himself, King Jesus, says that if a man puts away his wife for any other reason other than adultery, and she gets married to somebody else, he causes her to commit adultery, the one that he sent out. I don't want to be with you anymore. I'm tired. I don't like your movies you watch. But also whoever she marries, he causes them to commit adultery, because heaven does not recognize, oh, we just don't want to make it work. Oh, we're tired. Oh, it's been, I'm just through. I'm just through rooting for your team. You like sports too much. So the 3 simple guidelines. First of all, so that's the third one. I better write that down so I can remember. 1, only if they're in eternity. If you're married to somebody and they step into eternity after they've lived a beautiful, full, long life, and you're ready to want to get married again, if they're in eternity, that's okay, because the marriage relationship is, it's over. That is it. That is acknowledged by Scripture. And if the spouse steps into eternity, yes, you can. I guess these two come together, and that works. But with number 2, the second one, after you're married again. So just because your spouse gets, steps into eternity, that kind of goes back to the first 3 we did, which is you can't do it before marriage. So after your spouse steps into eternity, you can't just start fornicating and committing adultery because they're it goes back to you're now not married again. So that goes back to before marriage. And then it only works, of course, only with your spouse when you are married. But after marriage, it's only when appropriate. So it's not just you just get married, you just divorce and then get married to somebody else, and then you're free reign. Doesn't work that way because of the 3 realms we live in: the spiritual, the mental, and the physical. So first of all, it's only if they step into eternity, and then after you're married, it has to be those 2 that have to work, or if it ended in adultery, and then of course after you're married. So it's only when appropriate. Sexual intercourse is only appropriate in marriage, and if the marriage has ended through death or adultery, when you get married again, it works. If the marriage did not end in adultery, if it's just money problems, personal problems, work problems, she's doing too much on her job and you're doing too much on your job, dudes, and it's like, hey, this isn't working. She wants to go to another state, you want to go to another state, just petty stuff like that, natural things, that's not gonna work. So we're talking, because it's sin, and this is just how the universe we live in has been created and set up. So actually the Bible even says if a man sends a lady away and she decides to come back, in fact, the Bible even talks about in Corinthians, let them be restored. If they separate and come back together, let them be restored. If it wasn't for adultery or something like that, Even if it was, if the man decides to forgive the lady or the lady decides to forgive the man, but the God wanted to be together. If you get out for money problems, the Bible does not give you the right to get married again and start having sex. You can't do that. The Bible does. That's just, if it's not from adultery, It doesn't work that way. So we're talking about preservation physically, protection mentally, purity spiritually, for you, your current extended family, your future spouse, if there is any, for your current immediate family, and for you, 5, your future family, because that's a lot of people involved. You're a current future, and I guess I'll stick in 2.5. There'll probably 6 one, because if you are, well, yeah, I guess your past spouse, if you do separate, and your past spouse will, well, yeah, you can affect them too. Actually, I was thinking about that, so we'll have to get into that, because, you know, if you divorce your wife and she goes and get married, and it wasn't because of fornication, you caused her to commit adultery and someone else. So, but we'll look at these. And so, first of all, preservation physically. What a wonderful introduction. Preservation physically after marriage, proper only when appropriate. So you protect yourself physically if you wait until you get married again. After you follow those 2 guidelines, it preserves you physically for the same reasons as the other ones too. And it does. It preserves you from, you know, from physical sickness, disease, physical stress. You know, it prevents you from doing those. You know, it's physical, and so it preserves you physically. And not doing it is good too, actually, because some people, when the spouse dies, they start, you know, resist the spirit. You have to resist the spirit of grief, but they start, you know, they're sad because the other person's left. You know, they miss the person. We'll say it like this: they miss the person, look forward to seeing them again in heaven, but their flesh is just like, oh, I need to get with somebody real quick. And you don't want to do that on your body. You don't want to do that, because, you know, if you use that as an excuse to shoot on and just go ahead and get married because your flesh just has to commit sexual activity, then you can actually hurt yourself by doing that. So you don't want to just engage in sexual activity after your spouse has stepped into eternity, or if your spouse committed adultery, you don't want to do that, because that can lead to sexually transmitted diseases. It can lead to fatigue, stress on your body. It can lead to all sorts of problems, because you might not even be doing it for the proper things. You might just really be sad, you know. So so protect yourself. Only when appropriate, you have to preservation, physical preservation for yourself. So, you know, if someone's sad, you don't have any business trying to get with them, guys. If there's a girl who's just been divorced because of adultery, you might need to pray for her. You know, so you don't want to take advantage of somebody. That's we're really talking about ourselves, but hey, don't be taking advantage of somebody. If they ended in a relationship, the husband died, you know, doing something, you know, stepped into eternity, and they're sad. You don't want to take advantage of that. So personally, you can preserve yourself physically because of that. You can preserve your current extended family for the same way, because you don't want to start committing fornication again, or adultery if you're going to try to do it with someone else who's not married or whatever, for your extended family, because that will affect them physically, especially if you have a child. You know, you're feeling bad and you just had to have someone because, you know, you've been married for 28 years and they did something they weren't supposed to do, whatever, they stepped into eternity. You just go out there and commit fornication or commit adultery if you find someone who's married, and you can bring another child in to the world that can affect your extended family. Or if you get a sexually transmitted disease, that can affect your extended family physically, your parents, your siblings, your nephews and nieces and stuff like that. You can do that, or your grandkids. That can affect that too. Hey, grandkids see when grandparents are fornicating, they know that too. And preservation physically for your future spouse. If there is a future spouse for you, hey, if the Lord wants you to get married, keep having children, go for it. But if you commit fornication, because you're back outside the marriage thing, if it's because of that, death or something, or adultery, if you do that, you can affect them. Because if you get married to them 8 years from now and you fornicate 4 years before you got married, and now you have a 4-year-old child, hey, that person has to deal with that physically. That person is a physical entity in the house with y'all. It's not just you. It's not just you two after you get married. It's a physical person. Physical food has to go on the table. Physical clothes have to be bought. Hey, physical money has to be spent. So that affects your future spouse too, physically. It affects them. What you do or do not do. If you choose to only when appropriate, wait until you have that beautiful spouse, and it works. If you don't, you can affect them physically. Hey, your current, I'm going to put this in there, your current spouse, if there is any. If you do just divorce for non-fornication reasons, and you do commit adultery or even get married, it is still committing adultery if you get married to somebody else, because you didn't end that relationship because of adultery, you can affect your last spouse because you just broke it off. Y'all just broke it off. We're just not going to have anything to do with each other. And you do it in fornication or get married and can be committing adultery. You can affect your current spouse too. Because if another child comes in and you come visit them, there's another child that's inside the relationship that y'all have to deal with, because that makes them their step parent or whatever it is, because, or I'm not even sure. Well, yeah, that technically would make them their step, or yeah, probably. It probably will, because heaven doesn't recognize new marriages that are just, you just break off one, go get another one, break off one, go get another one. So technically it's still committing adultery, because if you just break off when it has nothing to do with adultery, then heaven still considers you married. So that's why they say the other person's committing adultery and whoever marries them commits. So technically heaven will look at that person as the stepchild. But anyways, if you do that, you can affect your your last spouse physically. If you just run off and, they might still love you or whatever. You run off and get a sexually transmitted disease and die, or lose your job physically because you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing, running up and down the road or something, that can affect them too. Because, they physically know you and you do have a physical presence in their life, even though you moved out of their life, that can do that. And I say your current spouse, if of course it was not ended because of adultery. Because if there was adultery, then that whole relationship, according to heaven, is over. And you can leave and you can be free, and they're free, the thing's over. But if it's not, then hey, that's still involved, and there is still another person there. That person's still alive, they're still on the planet Earth doing something. So that works. So, and next to be, protect preservation physically for that person, your last spouse. And for your current immediate family, preservation physically for your current immediate family. You have children. Let's say if you have children, who cares if they're 40 or 50 years old? And if your spouse steps into eternity, or the marriage ends because of adultery, you don't want to be committing fornication or adultery, because you don't want to affect them too. Your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, that affects them. If something physically happens to you, and it physically happens to them too, because if you get another kid and the grandkids show up and there's a baby at the house, that baby is there. It's during, movie time, pizza time, or you go to the water park, the theme park, as they're growing up, they've got another child there. There is you are physically affecting your family, your immediate family. So if you have kids and you fornicate after marriage, instead of waiting for the proper time, you can cause physical damage to the child, because they have to deal with that, especially if they live inside the house with you and they're teens or something, and you have another child, then boom, here goes another kid. Woo! Got another kid. So now there's another child in the house, hollering, I was about to say hollering and screaming, but there's another baby in the house, and your kid may be 14 years old. And there's no other spouse involved. There's no other person. So now it's you and the kid, your teenage kid now, and now you got a baby in the house. Or now the baby's somewhere out there, and so you're visiting and traveling, and you have to divide your physical time with your teenage child now with some other child that you had out of wedlock, and even child support and stuff. If you're in a country that expects people to help support their people, you got child support, that's also involved too. So your finances are now being diverted from your legal child, your real child that came out of marriage, is now being diverted to this child that is outside of marriage, outside of wedlock. And And really it affects the immediate family of that child too. That child is growing up outside of marriage. So that child is, even if you got married later with somebody else, you got this marriage, then you got this child, then you got another marriage, and they're all three different people, you know. That child is physically affected. Hey, children, you know, like, you know, hey, that child's physically affected. And you can physically affect that child. That child's coming into the world. That child will grow up, be a child. Grow up. Mother's Days, Father's Days, hey, Family's Days, Thanksgiving. Everyone's talking about their family. And here they are with you, and their real spouse, their real mom is somewhere out there, dudes, or if it's a lady, you know, their real father somewhere out there. And you have to take into account that child physically has to grow up and live their entire life out of that situation. And you don't want them arguing with your other child. You don't want your teenage kid feeling animosity from this baby now that you have. That's why we don't do this, because human beings are real. They have real emotions. And just because a teenager or an adult or a child suppresses an emotion doesn't mean it's not there and that it can't come out eventually. So it can physically affect them. It could actually physically affect them. Sometimes, you know, stress or whatever can physically affect somebody. So preserve physical preservation for your immediate family. That's why hey, only when appropriate. If the spouse steps into attorney, or you're divorced because of adultery, and you get married again, that is the only time to be able to have sex. It's that serious. And of course, your future family. It preserves your future family as well. Because like I said, if you decide to get married, you know, God's good, your other spouse steps into attorney or whatnot, and you decide to get married, if you save yourself, don't commit fornication, don't commit adultery, and your next family will be intact and perfect. Because when the Bible says that it's okay to separate because of adultery, really, people may be sad about it, and the kids from the previous marriage might not appreciate it. But since God said it, there is actually supernatural power that preserves that family unit. So if you have 4 kids and the mom, the lady, commits adultery and y'all split the marriage, those children are actually protected because God said you can end the marriage. They wouldn't be protected if you just went off and just, you know, split up and start doing other things. Then you got all sorts of problems. But they're protected because they're out of that original marriage. But if it's separated because of adultery, they're still protected. Now and so they're protected, but then the new family's protected too. If you have another child, it's in holy matrimony, and that child, that family is protected too. And you really get a lot less friction in there. If it was because of death, you know, stepping into attorney, or because of adultery, the families can coalesce better because it was because of a spiritually legal reason to separate the marriage, or the marriage was separated. There's really not another person walking around. If the person's an attorney, then that person's really not out there somewhere else doing something. Because of adultery, it's spiritually severed. So even though that person may be out there, it may be the mom of these other children, it really doesn't affect because you actually have that spiritual separation. So that's that. That's all we're going to do. And I have to remember, I'm going to put that number 3.5. So after marriage, only when appropriate, preservation physically. Physical preservation is important. It is one of the realms you live in, one of the universes. And you have to preserve physically. So only when appropriate. I love you. Thanks for joining me, and be blessed in the name of the living Lord, King Jesus, the Christ.